One of the examples of research of my PhD students is the dissertation of Victoria Minson, who studied the development of storytelling in children. And she applied the principle of the buds, and she discovered that it was a story when the girl could not tell the story about her monkey. In Australia, in the kindergarten, they are using the practice of storytelling, like show and tell, called show and tell. So the child can bring the toy from the home and tell the story, to show the toy and tell the story. And it was a problem that the girl could not tell a story about her monkey at all. And the problem was that why this girl couldn't tell a story? It might be lots of reasons for that. For example, problems with her memory, problems with her speech, thinking, or what. And then Victoria applied the principle of the buds, and she discovered that the girl is fantastic. The girl is very active. The girl knows a lot of stories. She has an experience to live in Jakarta. She knows the football teams, planets, Union Jack, everything. She is very talkative. She tells the stories about her life in Jakarta, her friends, only when somebody is talking to her. So the problem was that she's very good in telling stories only when you are communicating, asking questions, reacting in communication. But when the task is just to tell the story of her own, she could not. You see, the buds were there. She already can do, in cooperation with others, something which she cannot yet do of her own. Zone of proximal development. So, and this is how it works.
So she had a hard time being her own partner.
Huh?
Yes. So she had a hard time being her own partner, like almost playing the role of the.
No. In her everyday communication with these teachers and these other children, she is absolutely okay.
No, but what I'm saying is, when she didn't have a partner, she struggled.
Yeah, when the task is just to tell the whole story about the monkey, she cannot, because it's a little bit difficult for her. So, and then we created the way how to support this girl using some interesting things to be able to tell the stories. So to develop her storytelling, because the problem was not her memory was not developed. The problem was not in her speech development. The problem was not in her thinking. The problem was that storytelling which requires memory and thinking and so on is not developed and still remains in a bud stage. So, and then we identified that bud stage, and we started from that. So I don't want to tell you the whole story about this girl, but I'm just giving you an example of how important it is to identify the buds. This is the principle of the buds. Then the principle
was she able to tell stories sort of at the end of the experiment? At the end of the process?
Of course, yes.
Okay, so what developed? Was there a certain higher mental function that developed, or was there the ability to tell stories that developed, or what exactly developed?
What does it mean, ability to tell story?
Yeah, that's
storytelling requires different higher psychological functions working together. Memory, will, imagination, thinking, at least.
So let's say we take those four, yes?
Yeah.
Would your conclusion be that all four developed, or some sort of special combination of the four developed? Like, how would you?
Yeah, well, that's very difficult. It was not the focus of the research. So the whole focus of the research was not about to help this girl to develop. So the task was different, but I'm giving you just an example how we identified the buds and where are the buds.
I see.
So don't think that the whole research was about that girl. No. It's just an example. And as a result, she told the story not about monkey, but much more complex story, easily and individually. And even we asked teacher to provocate, to asking her questions which might mislead her from the story.
Mm-hmm.
But she was so strong that she didn't listen to the teacher, and she continued to tell the story the way she wanted to tell. So you see, well, but
is there a certain tool that was introduced that really allowed? I'd like to hear about that if you don't mind.
Maybe next time.
Okay.
Or the best way is just to invite Victoria Minson. She will be happy to give an interview for you.
Yeah. Okay.
Tell her about, ask her about her research, and you will be very, very, very impressed, because this is a high level, the highest level. So she's got her PhD degree, and the examiners of her thesis highlighted her impact like outstanding, 5 stars.
Yeah.
It's for monash, it's very, very rare. It's maybe 1%, top 1% top of all the completions of PhDs in monash, and she's got it. So she will be happy to tell you more about her research, because her research was not about developing children. Her research was to create a kind of matrix teachers can use to support children's development.
Perfect. Yeah.
She has developed a practical tool matrix, which is called PAM, Planning and Assessment Matrix. There are two ways. There are two ways of using this principle. The first way is educational, because I'm working at the Faculty of Education. My PhD students are not qualified psychologists. They are education researchers. And for them, the data collection is just an observation. They are observing children. Of course, they are bringing some tasks, challenging tasks, interaction, they interact, but the most they are observing children. In this way, what we are looking, when we have data collected, observations, might be hours, might be tens of hours of observations. In that data, we tried to find small dramatic events happened in children's life. It might be very, very small drama, like they are playing together and they want to play the same role, and they are in a collision. Or they play with their toy and they have to identify who plays the first, who plays the second. Or many, many things. Or in everyday situations, for example, sister and brother, how they, so all these, for us, these moments of the child's everyday life is the most important, because they are the most interesting moments to analyze. What are the contradictions? How they are resolving the contradictions? If the contradiction is not resolved, what the child has to do to overcome this contradiction? So this is the first way of using this principle for educational research. But as a psychologist, what I can do, and what I do, is that I can specially create the dramatic situations.
Or as a teacher.
Or as a teacher, I can specially create dramatic situation to see how people will be able to overcome this, what they do, what resources they have, how they activate their higher psychological functions. Who we are now mostly is the result of the dramatic collisions, events, and contradictions we went through. And what makes us different is that we went through different collisions, contradictions, challenges. So, okay. Well, that's important. And as a psychologist, I'm interested in these situations when we can specially create these dramatic collisions for children or for adults. And then we look, do they have enough higher psychological functions to overcome this? If they cannot, how they begin to interact with others in order to drink from this source of development, because Vygotsky said that social environment is the source of development. But what does it mean social environment is the source of development? What does it mean the river is the source of the water? river is the source of the water only when somebody comes to the river and starts drinking from it. So social environment is the source of development only when somebody begins to drink, to use this source to develop. It doesn't work automatically. It's not like if you put the cucumber into the salt water and it becomes salt. No. My first example is the research we just finished with my colleagues Melody Fleer and Hugh Walker in Australia. It was a 3 years project, big project, sponsored, funded by the Australian Research Council, which is ARC. By the way, that's one of the most prestigious grants in Australia. And the experimental study was to look at the process of development of child's executive functions in the situations of the play world. We were studying the process of development of children's executive functions by creating special conditions for development, which includes dramatical collisions. We were actually using the principle of drama.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to know more from me about what are executive functions. Everybody knows executive functions. Shifting, working memory, self-control, planning. So, and the study was...
What was the age range for the children?
We did children in prep. Kindergarten.
Okay.
Kindergarten. So just 1 year before the school. And the idea was we put the children in a certain conditions, specially created conditions, which is called play world. Play world is a world of play, and where the children and teachers are playing together. It's a role play. They are playing together, but the teacher is not a teacher anymore. The teacher is one of the participants. Teacher takes the role, and all children takes the role. But the most interesting is that this play world has a characteristics, different characteristics. I don't want to tell all of them, but one of these is that this play world is full of dramatic collisions. In a role, every child needs some challenging and dramatic collisions because of the plot, because of the narrative. And they have to play the role to overcome these dramatic collisions collectively first and then individually. And through this, they are becoming more and more able to control themselves, to inhibit themselves, to remember something, for example, as a password, which is important to remember to enter to the next level. So that was the idea. And the findings of that, we just published a paper about that. If you like, I can send you. Actually, we published 3 or 4 papers about it. The findings is that being involved in the dramatic situations in the play world, playing together with the teacher in a special sort of play, of course, they have, as a result, they have a significantly higher level of development of their executive functions, comparing to their regular training of the EF tasks. This is my first example with children. The second example of the research I was involved is the research which was done by my Brazilian colleague. Now she lives in Canada, but from Brazil, Fabiana Nasciutti. And what she did, she was a psychologist doing professional development sessions for school psychologists in Brazil, professional development program. Traditionally, the professional development program is that they come to the classroom and the teacher teaches them about what is school psychology, new findings in school psychology, all this very traditional, like school-like process. They are students, it's a teacher. So, but what Fabiana did, she created absolutely new system of professional development for school psychologists. Her idea was that for school psychologists, professional development is important, but what also is important is a personal development, which means how school psychologist identifies him or her as a human being. What is the role, what is the position of the school psychologist in relation to students, to teachers, to parents? What is the mission of the school psychology? Not mission which is written in the paper, but mission of themselves. So, and what she did, instead of giving them the lectures or workshops, she suggested them to discuss the problems from their practice. And her role was to dramatize those problems as much as possible. And what do you know what happened? First, they didn't expect this kind of professional development because they were ready just to sit and listen. And then they were against discussing their problems, and the most they were absolutely against any kind of dramatic things. But she insisted, and it was a lot of collisions because they didn't want, contradiction. But as a result, they started to share their ideas with them, and there were elements of insights, catharsis, crises, ahas. Lot of things. Through this, she moved them through the crisis from collision to crisis to the new level of understanding of what they are doing as a school psychologist. What are their responsibilities as a psychologist? Not as a job they do, but the responsibilities for the children, for families, for well-being, and so on and so on. And then she collected the data. She wanted them to make a diary about that, and she analyzed the diaries. How first they were very resistant, how they then gradually opened themselves, and then how they were involved, and then what were the moments of catharsis, moments of dramatic collision inside, and their final feedbacks were mostly fantastic, saying that I didn't learn something new, but I have learned something more about myself.
Experience something new. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and
there was a lot of risk taking involved on everybody's part, her part.
Yes, it was, of course. Yeah.
It was the risk of failure, the risk of this whole strategy bombing.
Yes, but first of all, she is a trained psychologist,
right?
And second, they are adults. I don't think that was the most difficult strategy in their lives. So, and third, of course, it was a kind of limitations of that. She didn't let the process go. It was under control all the time. But these are examples, just examples, how this principle works in the concrete experimental study. It explains why we were putting children in the play world in the dramatic collisions, why Fabiana created a new program based on the contradictions, on the collisions first, drama, and helping them to overcome this drama, not just create a drama and then let them go. No. She created the drama, and then they collectively created the ways of overcoming this drama, collectively and then individually. So that was the idea. It's not the idea just to create something bad for them and then say goodbye. No, of course not. Okay.
It's not just simply discomfort, it's discomfort and getting through it.
No. So these are examples of the concrete research. And one of my students, she did a fantastic study she was looking at English classes in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, they have at primary schools they have English classes. So, and the demand from the government, from the king of Saudi Arabia, is that they need a generation of people who can communicate with people in English to promote Muslim Islamic values, because Saudi Arabia is one of the countries, is the heart of the Islam, and holy places like Mecca and Medina are in. So, and the problem is that the classes in Saudi schools are organized in a very traditional ways. So children have to learn English words, English phrases. So through singing songs together, playing games together, lots of different activities. But what was not presented quite widely is that the settings and the pedagogies teachers use were focused mostly on language acquisition, but not on the development of their speech. You see, language acquisition, foreign language acquisition, and ability to speak and communicate in language is not the same. Of course, you cannot develop your speech without having any knowledge of the language, but there are different, psychologically, there are different things. Language is one thing, speech is another. Speech is when we use the language to communicate, which means speech is the process, high psychological function, but language is a tool. I can communicate with you, I can speak to you, sending you the same message using different languages. I might say to you, Anthony, you are doing a fantastic job collecting these videos. I might say the same. Anthony, делаешь прекрасную работу, собирая эти видеоколлекции. You see, I sent the same message to you using English and using Russian. I only changed the tool. I didn't change the message. Okay, so this is a kind of, and the point is that Saudi children, they know a lot of English words, but they cannot communicate. They cannot speak, because speech is a result of communication. The origins of speech, as Vygotsky says, is a communication. And for this, communication with the ideal forms is the most important. And the task for my student was to see what are the ideal forms teachers in Saudi Arabia use as ideal forms to support the development of English speech in their children. And she found that no, nothing. That's why they know a lot. But because of lack of communication situations, no communication, spontaneous, free communication in English, no English speech, no English speech. So it's very briefly. That's why. So the idea of ideal forms and interactions with the present forms was the core idea for my student to make a whole research project. She collected a lot of data, but making observations on the classroom activities, and she did a fantastic analysis about what kind of ideal forms and how they work. And she made suggestions about what might be changed in the practices of a classroom, what teachers can do to change their pedagogies a little bit, not to forget about language acquisition, because this is important, but plus to this, to spend some time by creating the situations where the child is forced to communicate, maybe with mistakes, doesn't matter, but communicate in English with other children or with the teacher in imaginary situations. For example, if the topic is shopping, so first teacher gives some vocabulary to children. Shop, buy, sell, price, money, how much, all these things. And then immediately she says, okay, now we're playing shopping. You are customers, I'm a seller. And they try to communicate. So she creates a communicative situation when the children are communicating, trying to, we are here to buy shoes, what is the size, left, right. So it builds a kind of communicative situations, and then the children can reproduce this situation to themselves. So therefore, they will be able to speak English. So, and this is a kind of thing. And I also should mention the fantastic work of Bert van Oers, from Professor Bert van Oers from the Netherlands. As you know, Holland is not an official country, official name of the country anymore. The official name is the Netherlands. So, and he did a fantastic research about how to support child's development of their thinking through play. And one of the famous things he did was just to play the shoes shop, when children have to find the proper size, the proper left or right, or something, learning this size measuring things. So, and you can find his works available. So, and this is all about ideal and present forms. So, and Vygotsky's example about, this is not the mom who was the ideal form for the child. It was not the mom's language which was the ideal form. By the way, in translation, it was translated in 1994 as mom's language provides the ideal form. But Vygotsky says mom's speech is ideal form. Because of that mistake, there is a lot of different interpretations of ideal forms. Somebody says that adults are ideal forms, which is not. Somebody says that language is ideal form. No. Very, very, very important is that the developed form, the higher psychological function which should appear in the child in the future. Specific certain higher psychological function. An example is speech, but speech is only example. The same is about volition, memory, attention, imagination, all these processes. So that's a kind of story about the principle of ideal and present forms. And now I hope you understand why it's so important and how helpful, how really helpful it is for me as a researcher to make my research design in a way, in a very specific, very concrete way. And by doing this, I'm also applying the dialectics of present and the future. And in doing this, I'm also applying a general idea of the most important distinguishing feature of human development is the interaction of ideal and real. And by doing this, I'm applying the idea of the social environment as a source of development. So you see how important this principle is, because it concretizes very, very big and deep ideas, and altogether it helps me to understand the process of development, to organize the process of development by bringing ideal forms, or organizing the interaction, or by just observing what are the ideal forms surrounding the child and how the child interacts with them. So dealing with cultural tools is important, and I can make a reference to the research of my colleague Veronika Nourkova, who is doing a fantastic work about the development of memory. Just memory, how contemporary people, especially students, are now using their memory. And what she discovered is that because of new tools, because of new science, because of new system of science and tools, there is a tendency that people do not memorize the information. They only memorize the place where this information is located, where to find. Okay? You see, the content of memory as a higher psychological function is moved from remembering the information to remembering just the place where to go to find this.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so that's interesting. But what is the most interesting is that the principle of mediation, the principle of signification, and the idea that not the sign mediates, but the human being mediates his or her activity and interaction using signs, old signs or new signs. Because do remember, signification is the use of signs and the creation of signs.
Mm.
So this is a universal principle which works because this is about the human development. This is a universal principle. Without using signs as mediators, there is no development.
You could see how this could lead to research, this law.
Well, yeah.
How it could support research.
Yeah, one of my colleagues. She was my PhD student, Victoria Minson. She did a very interesting study about how teachers in early years, no, I don't mean early years, I mean early childhood. So actually I mean kinder, so age 4, 5. How teachers, practical teachers might help children to develop their higher psychological functions on their level, of course. Mostly memory, because memory is the leading, as you know. So to help them to overcome the problems. And one of the cases was a case I presented in Moscow last year. It was a case of one girl who had a problem with storytelling. You know, I don't know in America, but in Australia, it's very popular practice in kindergartens, storytelling, which means, oh, no, not storytelling, but show and tell. Yeah, show and tell. Just children bring some toys from home and they are asked to tell a short story about it. And this girl had a problem. She could not. She did bring the monkey from home, but she could not tell any story about monkey. And there might be lots of reasons for that, yeah. But we discovered that the reason for that was that she didn't have developed internal tools to be able to tell the story according to the scenario he can keep in the memory and tell the story according to this. So the sequence of actions. So, and we developed a special program for this girl by introducing first external. So we just reproduced the 4 stages of development. So we took her and moved her through the 4 stages. And as a result, he was able to tell the story about 3 little pigs, for example. And from the very beginning to the very end, which is much longer story. It's much more difficult story than the story about the monkey. So because she had to remember all the plot, all the scenario, what every character says and when and how. And we even did the provocation. We invited the teacher who tried to change the story and saying that so changing the story, but the girl was saying, no, it was not like that. It was like that. So this is one of the examples. And what is interesting in that research was that on that basis, my younger colleague, she's now had a job in Melbourne University in I think it's a Deakin University. Yeah. So she's now a young early career researcher. And one of the outcomes is that on the basis of this research, my young colleague, Victoria Minson, she has developed a matrix for teachers that teachers can use to be able to notice the moments when the child has difficulties and to immediately create a small program of how to support the child to overcome these difficulties based on the principle of Vygotsky. And she introduced that matrix to teachers, and I hope that the matrix will be widely used in Australia, at least there is an interest in this matrix in Russia and in Sweden.
Mm.
And she was invited to come to Sweden to introduce this matrix to Swedish teachers, early kinder teachers. But because of the situation with the coronavirus, so it was all changed. But I think this is a kind of example of how we can use, how we can help children, but not using our, how to say, our speculations, but on the basis of the objectively existing laws. So,
Got it.
yeah, okay.
Okay, so principle 5 is, in some way, it forces you to sort of check yourself or not get too ahead of yourself or too excited, thinking something has been achieved when it might not. Is there any research studies that you can reference where this principle has been explicitly used, either in the design or in the execution?
Well, as I said, it was Vygotsky's principle, but as I said, I just put this list and introduced that list sometimes some years ago, and honestly, it was not as well accepted by the community because it's like in strong contradiction with the tradition. Because traditionally, so-called Vygotskian scholars, traditionally they don't care about qualitative change. They only speak about that, but they cannot give an experimental proof that this is a qualitative change. They don't care. That's why probably they don't like. And that's why I was, for many years, just expecting from next generation of young early career researchers to use these principles. And by now, there is an example of one study in Russia done by that, one study in Sweden, in Finland, in Brazil, and in Serbia, and in Greece. So young researchers are becoming familiar with these principles, and they like these principles because it gives us a clear picture. They can learn how to design Vygotsky's experiment without learning this directly from Leontief or Vygotsky. So when I do my experiments, when I try to do it myself, it's a kind of, the principle says, when you finish your data collection, when you did your post-experimental test, don't celebrate, it's not a finish. Come again in a week and repeat. And that will be finished, or you have to start from the very beginning, depending on the result. Because if there is no qualitative change, there is no development. If there is no development, it means that in your experiment you develop nothing. If you develop nothing in your experiment, so you have to think about how to change all the settings using all principles. This is very simple. I think it's very simple.
Can the fifth principle, when you do like a post test 1 week or 1 month later, can that be a sort of transfer style test where it's not really the same type of thing, but it's a different activity that would utilize?
Of course. We are not repeating the same.
Yeah,
it's stupid to repeat the same. So of course the same type, but different. Yeah. So, and you see the importance of this principle is very high, and it prevents us from being too optimistic that we can do everything following Vygotsky. I can read this quotation from Vygotsky. He says that high psychological functions are not built up as a second floor over elementary processes, but they are new psychological systems that include a complex merging of elementary functions, which are included now in a new system, and they begin to act according to the new laws. Neoformations are the reorganized system of functions. This is what neoformation is. Neoformation is the new type of organization of child's system of high psychological functions, and even child's activities in child's life. So this is what neoformation is. Neoformation is not just something new, like the child had no logical memory, and then we have developed logical memory, and the child has a logical memory. No, no, no. When the child when we develop logical memory, the child internalizes. It changes completely all other processes. All other processes are coming in the new system. They begin to work according to the laws of this new system. They do not disappear, but they are. So this is a total qualitative reorganization, not just a transformation. It's a qualitative reorganization. This is what's important. This is what neoformation is. Neoformation is not just something else, something plus something new. No, this something new should be new in a dialectical sense, which means this something new should be a new system of all other functions.